You would have passed through the legal profession. As a young attorney, what are some of the challenges that you would have faced and how did you overcome them? Parliament has always existed and our citizenry always have an opinion. What do you think can be done to make the parliament or our system of governance a bit more palatable to the minds of people?
My first great challenge was when the time came to discuss what is commonly called the budget, and I left the Red House at 3 o'clock in the morning and then realized it was a new day, and then had to go to court the following 6 hours. Those were challenges because nobody out there cared that I just came out of the Red House.
Welcome to another episode of The Blueprint with Dr. Jelani I. Reid. I am your host, Dr. Reid, medical doctor by profession, activist by passion, and a lifelong student of learning, change, and transformation. Today, on the episode of The Blueprint, we're going to be discussing with a legal luminary, a major in the cadet force, a member of the Judicial and Legal Services Commission, former independent senator, and honestly, if I continue going on and on and on, his introduction alone will take up the entire episode. Members of The Blueprint, we're going to dive deep into the story, the career, life lessons, and wisdom of none other than Elton Prescott, Senior Counsel. So, if you're a young professional, a young lawyer, or someone that is interested in wisdom and learning, I strongly advise that you get your notepads ready and let's dive deep. So, thank you very much for coming, Mr. Prescott.
My pleasure.
You know, in another time, I guess you would have been Elton Prescott, King's Counsel.
Not in my lifetime. No.
So, Mr. Prescott, Senior Counsel, legal luminary, was law always your pathway?
I doubt. When I did begin to think of work, I was at secondary school. And it crossed my mind I could be a school teacher. But one of my secondary school teachers put me in my place. He used some obscene language and told me I was being silly. And so I went off not knowing what to do. I started work at a bank. And then one day a lawyer came in dressed up in his lawyer garb and I asked about it. And he said, yeah, you could do that, man. And I said, okay.
Wow.
And that was it. Well, I sought how to get there and went and that kind of thing.
Okay. So law wasn't necessarily an interest. It came about by circumstance.
Yes. It wasn't a passion that I had. In fact, I don't know if I had a passion for anything.
So after over 5 decades, clearly you have a passion now.
Oh, certainly, yeah. Certainly.
So how was your experience in the legal profession looking back?
You want me to go over 50 years?
Over 50 years.
Okay. No, I started just around the time that we introduced a fused legal position here. The profession was bifurcated, so there were barristers and there were solicitors, and I am a barrister. The barrister is the one who pleads the case in court, to put it mildly, and the solicitor did the preparatory work and the meeting with the clients. And so the client doesn't become my client, my customer. The instructing attorney or solicitor, as he then was then called, one who deals with the commercial side of it. But all you do is you select which area you would like to work in.
Right.
I started doing some criminal work and then I went to some civil work, which is the other side, the contract law, the administrative law, the negligence cases, that sort of thing. And I found I was doing fairly well with that. And there are some aspects of the criminal law practice that I didn't quite like. So I stayed away from that. Then I also began to do labor law, which is industrial court practice. And that too fitted in well with my disposition. And so I continued in that vein over the next 45 or so years. It has been a good journey. I have learned quite a number of things along the way. There was a time when I said, if a youngster coming into the practice hadn't had his own banking account, he couldn't possibly be a lawyer because there are things you need to know about life that you don't necessarily get when you come in at age 23, 24. All you know is the few little things you have learned in the law.
Correct.
So I have learned over the years quite a number of things, and I've been exposed in areas I would not have been exposed to.
So you sit in a unique position where you would have gone through the evolution of the legal profession in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
You know how it was, I guess, in the past. You know what we were attempting to do. And you will also have a point of view and understanding at the end result of some of the changes that we would have attempted over the years.
Yeah.
Looking back, to compare between the legal profession now to the legal profession there, what's your view on that?
The most outstanding difference is that the cordiality and the closeness that you had with practitioners has either disappeared or begun to dwindle. And it may well be not so much that personalities have changed, but that the rules of the practice have changed. So that, as I pointed out to you, everybody now is an attorney and can do any aspect of the profession he wishes.
Yes.
And so you find that many people, and for financial reasons, I suppose, tend to hold or hoard whatever they get within their space.
Yes.
So nobody gets a part of that action unless you can't handle it. And regrettably, there are those who, even though they can't handle it, still want to. There was a time too when I started that all of the activity within the profession, including the trials, were virtually done in the open. That is to say, any young lawyer could come into the court and sit there and learn by observing certain things.
Right.
That has considerably been reduced. We now move into small courtrooms, 10 by 10, the judge, the witnesses, that sort of thing. And since COVID and we've introduced remote hearings, etc., that has reduced it even more. So that the opportunities for learning are very limited. And we haven't equally introduced internships.
Yes.
Although people do turn up at firms and spend some time learning, if we had an apprenticeship or internship system, that might have done more for the quality that you get.
Yes.
And since I mentioned quality, let me confess, as I have done quite recently, that the people who have been trained in the Caribbean at the university here have turned out to be quite good and even better than some of those older fellows like myself who went to the It's a fact. They've learned the West Indian way. They've introduced their own cultures, and that's how it is. And it's really what our culture should have been anyway, because it's homegrown. But the quality of their work is not substandard by any means. It's equal to or better than many of the older practitioners. So those are the changes, I can confess. I think you may find that there's a greater number of women, but that's just life.
Yes. You know, it is interesting. You made a point that I am an advocate for introduction of technology in anything.
Yes.
So I saw what would have transpired with COVID and the changing of the legal rules to now facilitate virtual trials. And I have seen that as a step forward.
Yes.
But I didn't contemplate on the lost opportunities that comes along with that.
Yeah.
Because I can compare to the medical profession. The first 2 years is heavily just theory, and the latter 3 years, it's heavily you're learning on the go. You're on the wards, you're in the hospital, you know, that kind of thing. And I appreciate a system like that for medicine because it's a hands-on approach and it's practical learning. And I guess that is something that we have to look into as a society where our young professionals are, young lawyers. But SC, you would have passed through the legal profession. As a young attorney, what are some of the challenges that you would have faced? And how did you overcome them?
People needed to be acquainted with you in those days, and I think even more so now. In fact, people who are outside of the profession think that you can only get by if you know somebody in the Trinidad setting. You know? I think, because I do have a very clear recollection, I think I was just fortunate that the people who I came across either saw some capacity or I just happened to meet them at the right time. And so they would say, why not do X for me? And I was amenable. I would take opportunities. You ask me to go and put off a case for you, I'll go and do it. And what the system allowed then, as I said, things happened all in the open. There were large courtrooms and everybody. So if I went there and I was making an application for an adjournment and I either didn't do it well or I did it well, some senior lawyer was watching.
Right.
And he would either tell me that I didn't do it well and I should have done X, or he would note that I had done it well and keep my name in his memory, because
Yes.
one day he may need somebody like me to do the same thing.
Yes.
So that's an essential aspect of the change that has occurred. And that was my experience then. Later, I think I said that although I did some criminal work, I began to feel that the associations with the people who are in that area, it's difficult to describe it. I didn't want them coming to my door and say I want to go and get bail or something at that hour of the morning,
Yes.
at any hour of the day or night. And I have family. And so that was one of the other experiences I had. So I eventually, gradually delivered myself of the criminal work. The civil work is more sedate. It requires a greater amount of deep thinking.
Yes.
Criminal work you can get by if you have wisdom and smarts.
Yes.
You must know some criminal law, of course.
Yes.
But to persuade a jury requires a different skill than to persuade a judge, I think.
Yes.
And that has been what I have come to.
So, were you always the talker in school or growing up?
I don't know what other people think.
Because, okay, would you consider yourself when you were younger a quiet child or someone that was expressive in their thoughts? How would you describe your younger self?
I'll have to do it by analogy. Older people think when they see young children who are very chatty,
Yes.
that they will make good lawyers because they probably think that is a criterion.
Yeah.
I doubt I was that. I don't think I was ever outgoing and chatty.
All right.
I did read quite a bit, and you might have said I was studious.
Right.
But people who know me, children who know me from school, may have a totally different view
Okay.
because I engage in all the mischief that everybody else does.
So, all right. So we have the not so chatty young Essie that has transitioned now to having to give presentations in front of a jury, in front of a judge and opposing counsel. How was that first experience for you?
I don't remember. I will confess, I told a young lawyer that recently who was worried about her anxiety levels when she had a child, that all of us do.
Yes.
Even the most senior lawyer, I think, from the time you are ready, there's bound to be some anxiety.
Yes.
If you are in the Court of Appeal and there are 3 judges, you have to decide which judge must you pitch your angle at because they all have different backgrounds, they all have different appreciations of what is going on. And all those are things, and you're required to start cold.
Yes.
So I learned eventually to get on with it. If I knew my work, and I usually do, I will get on with it, you know. And then all of the courts are different, all of the judges are different. You take your risks. But the important thing is to know what your material is
Yes.
and what is the relevant law, and go brave. And accept that you might lose some.
Yeah. So you are practicing attorney that eventually would begin to hold leadership positions in the profession and even in you executing your duties. What are the lessons that you would have learned as compared to a practicing junior lawyer to now being a leader in the legal profession?
When I look over my life, I have been thrust into things. I haven't made any conscious decision that I want to be a leader in anything. People look on and they may invite you to do something. If I'm invited to do it and I accept to do it, I will put my best foot forward, so to speak. I can't think of an occasion when I said I'm going to be a leader in this. I've done all sorts of things, both legal and outside of the profession, in sport, now I'm in these commissions and so. And it's just what I do. Things that I know I can't do, I stay away from.
Okay, so you're going with the flow, basically.
It seems so. I can't remember a time when I said I'm going to do X.
Right.
Or rather, going to achieve a certain position.
Right.
And went after it. And
so actually that is more interesting where leadership is concerned. Yeah, why? So because you didn't plan it, you have been thrust into the position. So you're now the leader.
yeah.
What have you learned?
People tend to depend on your integrity and some discipline from you.
Right.
And I suppose the capacity to listen to others and allow their ideas to marinate and make something out of it. Beyond that, I don't know. I dress well and I turn up on time.
So that is it. We have to dress well and turn up on time.
It's how you impact others, you know.
Yes.
You might have sat and seen me across the room and you might have said, well, he has a certain way he does things.
Yes.
And that might impact you one way. It might impact another chap another way.
Yes.
And I don't make a serious effort to impress on people by my style or anything. I just do what I do. And I take the risk that at least 50% will say that's okay.
You know, Senior, the more we get into this conversation, the more amused I become. Because as a young person looking up, Senior Counsel, Senator, Major, it is difficult to either see oneself in that position. And now having this conversation with you, you realize that apart from the titles, it's just Elton Prescott being himself.
I'm pleased to hear you say that. It sounds intimidating when you call all the various things I've done.
But that's wonderful. And I hope that it's a lesson that other young persons can grasp from.
So maybe that should have been one of my answers to your leadership question. Maybe the quality of being oneself matters.
So you have been practicing law. We're going to flip it a bit. How has the experience been making law?
Making law?
Yes.
No. That was a part of my life I enjoyed.
Yes.
In being in the parliament. It was only a 5-year period. And I had an opportunity, really, yes, to contribute to what it would look like at the end. I would have preferred if I had had two different governments, to be sitting in the parliaments of two different governments, because then I would appreciate their policy positions differently. Because as an independent senator, you are really reacting to what the government brings forward. And there are some limitations also on what you can do. So, for example, I learned you don't challenge them on a finance bill. Or if the Attorney General says, I hear you, but I'm going with this, so you simply backed off because you're supposed to be independent. You can't be pressing beyond.
Yes.
So my experience there was valuable to me. It caused me to look at some areas of life that I hadn't looked at before. I mean, we did the Dogs Act once. So who would have thought that I'd be sitting down reading a piece of law about how to mine a dog? Or how to but we did it.
Yes.
And then there was another one. I think it was the Children's Act, but it could have been. And so some areas of law that I had given up, family law and so, I gave up that quite some time ago. I had to go back now and put on my family head,
Yes.
and my parents, or my thinking of the welfare of children in order to produce good legislation. Most people in this who look on at parliamentary debates, regrettably, are not accepting that you could be an independent senator. So I have met people who didn't know me, and they will either think I was for or against, depending on which piece of legislation it was. I pride myself in saying that I went with what was before me, and the way I felt about it, and the way I thought it could be bettered.
Yeah.
If I stood on your corn, well, we will make up for that. Life is like that.
Yes.
And if you succeeded because of something I said, well, it's to your benefit. I didn't get anything for it. You know. Those were good years. Long hours, good years.
So, did it change your perspective in terms of the practice of law from making the law?
No. I was always careful to confront what I am doing in the law. Right. If I picked up a piece of legislation and I thought it was weak, I would make sure I studied it well and treat with its weaknesses, either to my benefit or not. And that analysis of the law is what I did most while I was in the parliament. Right. I don't think it changed my concept of how things were done. Today, when I see poor structure in legislation, I lament that there aren't many people in the parliament now who think they should spend the time looking at the structure. Things would be quite different. Just language, where you position a piece of policy. Right. But I am now an onlooker.
Were there any challenges in that 5-year period? Not, I guess, legislative-wise, but it's a new role as a senator
Yeah.
and as an independent senator in a political climate.
Yes.
Were there any challenges that you would have encountered that was new to you, and how did you deal with it?
I'm hoping I understand the question. My first great challenge was when the time came to discuss what is commonly called the budget.
Right.
And I left the Red House at 3 o'clock in the morning and didn't realize it was a new day. In other words, I've been going from since
Yes, the day before, yes.
And then I had to go to court the following next 6 hours. Those were challenges because nobody out there cared that I just came out of the Red House. The preparation also for a debate required time. It required you to give a broad view of the thing. When I'm preparing preparing a case, I take the legislation for what it is and I work around it. Today I'm required to create something that will meet somebody's policy requirements. So there was that challenge. I may say, by way of a negative answer, nobody has ever approached me to change my view about any of the things that I said, although there were people who disagreed. Yes. And that is the place for disagreement. So a lawyer on the other side might get up and say something. And if the rules allow it, I might have a response, a reply.
Now, Parliament has always existed, and our citizenry always have an opinion about Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
And we both know the importance of Parliament in a society like ours. What do you think can be done to make the Parliament or our system of governance a bit more palatable to the minds of people, the average Jew?
Until you spoke of palatable, I had a clear answer to you. And I'll give you that first. Those who say that the parliamentarian, the member of the House of Representatives, should manage only the business of his constituency, if that's how they put it, I am partial to that view. We allow into the parliament at the level of the representation people who really ought not to be there. I think you need people who are, there's no polite way to put it, people who have competence.
Yes.
And competence in a number of things, but management of business, management of your profession. If you were choosing a board of directors for a group of companies in Trinidad and Tobago, you would not choose some of the people who end up in the parliament. The selection criteria for parliament clearly is different from the selection criteria for a business. And I'm not saying only a business. If you were putting up people in the university campus or on the guild, if you changing the regional health authority, you look for a certain kind of background, a certain kind of input.
Yes.
We're not getting that. I can't remember your question, but I hope I have dealt with it.
How to make it more palatable, but...
Palatable is what threw me off, because what is palatable to my grandmother,
it will be completely
and
different.
what is palatable to you and to me are all different,
Right.
you see?
Yes.
So I can't see what would make it palatable.
I feel the lawyers coming out.
Well, okay, fine. But that is what threw me off, yes.
So your 5 decades of understanding and your experiences of life, you have been an advocate for the protection of rights, privileges of citizens, and defending such. And we now live in a space, locally, regionally, internationally, where misinformation is becoming the norm. What is your view in terms of, from a legal point of view, of addressing something like that?
I have not given it thought. I have not given it thought at all. I am just alarmed that, well, what was the word they used in relation to Trump? Alternative facts can find their way onto the front page. I don't have a view on that. I regret. Because I can't come to terms with it, and I can't imagine how to unravel it.
Okay.
I am just worried that things I see and hear may or may not be true.
Right.
And so I limit my interaction with other people. I don't do like some people and send it to somebody else and begin to make something out of it. I don't give it life. But I wish I could go back to the day when I thought everything I heard, everything I read in the newspaper or heard on the radio or on TV was fact.
Yeah. So lawyer, legislator, member of the Judicial and Legal Services Commission, serving on other commissions, and understanding now from your point of view that the majority of your achievements or positions of leadership, it's one that not necessarily did you seek, but it's ones that you have been thrown into. So therefore, you are now entering these positions for the first time, not having any, I guess, real appreciation beforehand. How do you approach entering these new fields when given the opportunity to serve?
In each of the more recent cases, and that is the commissions, I have also been on the Regional Judicial and Legal Service Commission, which is the CCJ. You try to get a grasp of what their mandate is, and you do that firstly by reading the instruments, and then you get the feel of the other members around the table, what are their objectives. You learn their culture because you have to do that, because everything is a debate and an exchange and a battering. And when you have a point of view, make sure you express it in the best possible way and defend it if you have to. There's no point sitting on a board and being silent and putting up your hand when they call for an answer. You know? So I have spoken out on occasion in whichever committee I am on. And sometimes I find I'm very pleased to see that people go along with what I have to say. I don't know if people say, well, if he's a senior counsel, maybe he's right. I hope they don't say that.
So you don't personally weaponize the essay?
No, in fact, to the contrary. If you didn't mention it, I wouldn't mention it.
Yeah, interesting. Now, on these commissions, of course, there are challenges. There are perspectives that, what? It would be a response. And obviously, you would bring your point of view to, as you would have indicated, in trying to push the board or the commission in the right way. And
you mean when things don't go my way?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And, in these commissions or in these bodies, there tends to be collective responsibility. Your personal view on a matter and what is the outcome from the body as a whole.
I insist tactfully that it should be recorded that I have a different view. You want it there, in the event that the day should come. I've done it in the parliament as well. I have said, well, this might be the majority thinking, but I have a certain position. And so you can go back to it at any time, go check Hansard, you will see it, check the minutes of the meeting. That's all. And you try to avoid disquiet amongst your membership. Please put that on the record. Ought to work.
Now, looking back over 5 decades, what is your proudest moment? Or what do you believe is your legacy in the legal profession?
I don't know. Maybe I could admit this. I learned early that you ought to have time for your juniors. I learned that it helps the junior because I was a junior once. Yeah. If the senior person took the opportunity to put certain lessons before you or to correct you, you don't get into a high horse and feel he doesn't know what he's talking about. Today, I give a lot of my time to young practitioners, and I get the impression that they feel that they benefit from it. And so if there's a legacy, that would be it, that I have given of my time to my colleagues, particularly the juniors.
So mentorship.
And I try not to be combative unless I have to be. It's not easy to be calm and quiet all the time. If I have to be abrasive, I do it reluctantly. I may call you outside after and say, well, boy, I hope you understand. Yeah. There's a chap now who's a senior leader at the bar who I knew when he first came in. And we were against each other one day. And it was getting a little...
Yes.
And I asked the court to give us an opportunity. We went outside and stand in another room. I said, man, as a fella, I like you. But me and bound to get down to that level. So we understood each other. We understood it wasn't a fight. I wasn't going to hit him or anything.
Yes.
And we went back in, did our matter, and we became friends all this time. So if there's a legacy, it might be in my cordiality, I suppose. It might be my availability to others. And, sometimes I have been successful. It might be in those little moments.
Now, you're a lawyer. You're a senior counsel. And our country is I guess, in the process of constitutional reform and trying to rethink what our framework of going about our business should be. With your experience working in the current system and with your plethora of knowledge and regional and international exposure, what are some of the changes you think as a society that we should consider in the topic of constitutional reform?
My first victim would be the Prime Minister. The role of the Prime Minister in this country initially it was meant to be that he is the fountainhead, he or she, right. The monarch. We didn't give up the monarchy, and some have overdone it. We must address that. We must determine how much power do we wish to put into the hands of the Prime Minister, and by extension, the Cabinet. Because our cabinets have made decisions on some things that I think they really ought not to have put their hand in. And they made some decisions that even they cannot support. There's a very recent example. And so I would go there. Right. I would think that our electoral politics is, regrettably, I know you said the Constitution, I will come to some other things, but our electoral politics needs to be readdressed and ensure that what we get in the Parliament is of a better quality, more value to the society. And I'm not talking money, I'm talking a number of things. You know, Lloyd Best has had this thing about the Big Macu Senate, where all of the interests were represented. It's not a far-fetched idea. We are a small country. 40 or 50 civil groups in a body, in an area, and you can control their contributions, we may get better value out of that. So those are some changes in the Constitution I'd like. It is fast becoming, I'm going out to this, what we regard as the right of the, let me put it differently. In a criminal matter, we say the accused is innocent until proven guilty. I don't get away from that, I accept that. But we have bent a little too far backward in some areas. And so what we are exposed to now socially, the violence and the crime, could have been nipped in the bud if we were a little more stringent in our treatment of the accused person. I'm not saying that the police are always right, indeed, I'm sure that they are not. And whenever I hear the cry of a mother whose child is killed, I suspect that she didn't necessarily know or think that was what her child was engaged in, and she might be right. So there needs to be something done, and I don't know the answer. There needs to be something, and the Constitution, therefore, insofar as it continues to hold that he has that right, that he's innocent until proven guilty, we may need to address that. We may need to introduce laws, and some countries have done it, where the burden shifts to the accused person. We're doing it now in the state of emergency. We've shifted the burden.
Yes.
You found with a gun, you have to tell us some reason why you have it.
Correct.
And we've always had it. There's a criminal offense called unlawful possession.
Right.
Where if the policeman saw you with something,
yes,
all he did was go in court and say he was acting suspiciously. And you have to explain why you have that something. It might be $200. It might be a Afro comb. I was in a court once where all the man had was an Afro comb. And he was brought to court. He was in unlawful possession of a weapon. Yes. And both the magistrate and I said, what the hell? Everybody knows the Afro comb. But the burden had shifted to him to say, well, no, I have an Afro. Or whatever you see here is going to become an Afro one day.
Yes.
So I'm taking in front.
Yes.
Those are the things that come readily to my mind when you ask that question. Okay. If we can find no better role for the president, we should relook at that also.
Okay. Probably fuse the both, an executive president.
It may be the best approach.
Okay. With checks and balances.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have something on Blueprints called Rapid Blue, which is, I'm going to ask you some questions to get to know you a bit more. And the first thing that comes to your mind, that's the response we want to get.
That's an irresponsible position for me to be in.
So, Essie, what book most inspired you growing up? What is the most interesting book have you ever read then? Or the one that if someone is to ask you,
Dragon Can Dance by Earl Lovelace.
who was your greatest mentor or influencer throughout your years?
Throughout my years,
Yes.
Ian Barnes, unknown school teacher, the man who cursed me off when I told him I wanted to be a school teacher.
Lol. If you could have dinner with a historical figure, who would that person be?
You want my immediate reaction?
Oh, yeah.
A historical figure? Can I come back to that one? I really don't know. Who's a historical figure?
Well, anybody who's not alive now.
Napoleon.
Okay. Interesting.
Who's a historical figure?
Looking back now, what advice would you give young Elton Prescott?
Be a little more assertive so that the time that I spent getting the courage to do some things could have been spent doing the thing.
Yes. And in one word, how would you describe your leadership style?
Accommodating.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, you would have heard from Elton Prescott, SC. And my closing question to you, SC, is what piece of advice would you give to a young practitioner of law now, today?
But I think I've answered that in part. I said, firstly, confront the law.
Mm-hmm.
You pick up a piece of legislation, don't just read it, try to understand what it is, what is its purpose. You may look for weaknesses if it benefits you,
Yes.
and work with that. Do the research so that you are prepared.
Yes.
I would say also be courteous to your colleagues, because you never know when the shoe would be on the other foot. If somebody calls you today and asks you to consent and adjournment, don't say no just because you could say no.
Yes.
Yeah, because one day you might need one.
Yeah.
Your car might break down, that kind of thing.
Yes.
So those are two of the things. And I did say to you that I wear my clothes well, and in other words, present your image well.
Yes.
Your image is going to be important.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter if you are seen that evening partying down the place in some PSA or wherever people party these days in a short pants,
Mm-hmm.
because they know that you are wearing a different hat at that time.
Correct.
Do that well as well.
Right. Right. Best foot forward all the time.
Best foot forward.
Yes. So, viewers, audience of The Blueprint with Dr. Jelani Reid, we would have heard from our legal luminary, and we would have passed through. We dived into years of experience, wisdom, knowledge, and throughout the process, we would have learned a great deal from Elton Prescott, Senior Counsel. Being resilient, going with the flow, learning from life's lessons, and putting your best foot forward. And as individuals in our individual spaces, personal development, I believe that these are lessons that we can take into whatever profession or sphere of life that we may endeavor to achieve. This is another episode of The Blueprint with Dr. Jelani Reid. It is my pleasure always to be with you. Email us at theblueprintpodcast2025@gmail.com, where you can nominate who should be a part of our conversation, our safe space. And remember to stay inspired, stay true to form, and begin your blueprint for tomorrow. Thank you very much.